Welcome to APPA's weekly webinar. My name is Billy Zidek, Standards and Codes Administrator for APPA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to APPA's website later this afternoon, and a follow-up email will be issued to you as a reference on where to locate the session. Professional continuing education and AIA-CLU credits are being offered for today's program. If you are an AIA professional requiring a certificate, please send an email to me at billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @appa.org, along with your AIA membership number if you have not done so in the past. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Alex Gentry. Alex, take it away.
Thank you, Billy, and thank you everyone for attending. You know, this group here and everyone at Penn State really, and I'm sure everyone on this call too, worked extraordinarily hard this summer to plan for and deal with an extraordinary situation. And, you know, we continue to today as it is ever evolving. And we're really grateful to have this opportunity, not only to share our story, but to take the time to put pencil to paper and think about what we did and what we learned and what we did well and what we could have done better. And so we're here to do that today. Before we begin, we'll talk a little bit about who we are. So as Billy said, my name is Alex Gentry. Together with Jason Wolfgang, we run the facilities information system and the scheduling systems for Penn State. Tom Case is the space management architect, and Mike Weaver is the facilities coordinator for general purpose classrooms. And we are all part of Penn State University. So large land-grant university. As you can see in this image here, the circles with the numbers in them represent the amount of buildings in each area of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we have University Park in the center of the state, and then about 20 other campuses, 40,000 students at University Park, and about 40,000 when you add the others together. So the numbers on the side speak for themselves here. What's that mean? It means a lot to manage on a good year and a great deal to manage on a year like 2020. So the four of us fall in the space management unit at Penn State, and we're under planning, design, and properties and the Office of Physical Plant. And we are based out of the University Park campus, but we support all of the campuses in the Commonwealth. We do several things in space management, and we work very closely with a network of facilities coordinators. So these folks are embedded in each college, unit, and campus, and they work closely with us. We work closely with them to align everything from a facilities perspective, and we rely heavily on each other. And you'll hear about our relationship with the FCs in doing this planning work that we've been doing from this summer and throughout this fall. And so we're going to work through this in chronological order, and I'm going to start off with Mr. Tom Case.
Thanks, Alex. So where do we start? Well, start in the beginning, right? Next slide. Everybody wanted to know what's our existing status of rooms. Classrooms which are directly under physical plan OPP and directly under space management control. We do a pretty good job of tracking our yearly utilization. This is from fall of 19. The capacities there are breakouts that the registrar gets requests from schedulers from units to schedule. You can see the average there for both seat and time is 67%, and everything over that just increases exponentially. So the question from OPP administration then was, can we get more students in? Can we increase utilization? Can we teach more? Well, at 80% or better, it's pretty hard to teach maybe from 7 till midnight. So that was our kind of our marching order. What do we do now? Next slide, Alex. Everybody started going to Zoom in March or May. Pam, our manager of our unit, was sitting in a Zoom and started doodling. That's her sketch on the upper right there. And she's an engineer by background, and she came to the realization that a hexagonal pattern would likely be more efficient than a square pattern. So I drew those out. She sent me a little message while she was in her Zoom, and I sketched that out, and you can see the square footage differences there, and it actually is more effective. So I took a typical plan and laid out the hex pattern and thought, oh, not too bad. I mean, that's 90 to 30s, sounded pretty good. But then we got administration to look at what we're going to do all that furniture, and they said there's no way we can do that. We have 22,000 seats at UP, and it wasn't going to be possible to store all those somewhere and or move them. So we had to look at the one on the left, and you can see the drop in efficiency to under 20%. We have to leave all the furniture in place. So that was a real issue. Next slide. So what we did, the registrar sent me a message pretty quickly early on and said, are you going to come up with capacities for us? They run their optimizer for scheduling 6-8 months in advance for the following semester. So all the classes had been scheduled for a long time. So I took those percentages. What I took was all of 386 rooms and took a quick sampling of them, about 50 rooms, maybe 4 or 5 in each category, and came up with those percentages. So we sent that to the registrar, so they had an idea. Again, she said, are you going to come up with all of these for all the rooms? The next slide. So I took a spreadsheet, divided it into those different categories the registrar uses, and assigned those percentages. And you can see a rounded seat count. So a room of 20 goes down to 8. So now you're working at 30%, maybe higher by those averages in a room. So now we got a real problem because you got a third of the seating that's available. Where we're going to go with that. So we gave that back to the registrar to churn another program. Next slide. Here's an example of one that we had done early on. One of the things we wanted to always do is create an instructor area in the front of the room. Instructors were rightfully concerned about having too much interaction with students coming and going. So we took that in each case out of a room. And then we had to lay these out with the clearances you can see there. In a curved room like this, it even complicated the efficiency or capacity even more. And in any large room like this, most of them are fixed seating, so you can't shift these around, use the hex pattern, or even shift them to the side. So that created a real issue. You can see this room ended up being well below that at 16%. Next slide. So here's a sampling of the kind of rooms we have on campus. The left one is our largest lecture room on campus at over 700. When we drew this out, you can see it was only 137. So wow, less than 20%. This room is scheduled out 10 hours out of the day, probably from 8 till 7 at night, used for large lecture labs. And so we knew right away we were going to have a real problem. In the upper middle, it's a tablet armchair layout. You can see what we ended up doing there is shifting the unused seats against the other seats. We learned along this whole process as we were drawing things that obviously did encourage someone to sit in those seats. But again, you can see that utilization's at about 30%, not very good. On the right, upper right, it's a different type of seat. It's an individual desk and chair. That one's a little bit higher at 36%. You can see we stacked an unused row went against the window wall. As we move forward with physical plant, they wanted to have all of the chairs removed. So we left the desks in place to create that spacing, but stacked all of the unused chairs out of the way to clearly indicate where you should sit. On the bottom is a computer lab. A number of our general purpose classrooms are computer labs. They're fairly dense in their setup. They're also facing face-to-face, which is not an optimum setup in a situation where you're trying not to communicate viruses. So you can see how those are staggered back and forth in order to create the most efficiency in that layout. Again, a little over 30%. Next slide. One of the things that happened, obviously, with all the rooms that were over 100, those all became, unusable for that kind of space. So we needed to find a lot of alternative classrooms for large capacity teaching. We looked at all sorts of non-classroom spaces, gymnasiums, auditoriums, the ROTC drill deck, which is shown here, the State Theater downtown, which is used for 1 or 2 classes previously. So more classes were taught there. We visited all of these spaces with a group of technology people, ourselves, physical plant project managers, to see what had to happen. Technology had to be reviewed. The access, lock, unlock systems and scheduling had to be looked at. Whether there was temperature control, most were okay. This one's a unique one because it's basically a garage, had no air conditioning. If the owner had furnishings in there, you'll see some pictures later. We had to be able to move those out of the way, relocate desks that we had to, move back in, and that type of thing. If you look at the plan on the left there, we were able to get 100 seats in here, which was really a big deal. Because of its layout, we started to look at technology, and we had to put 2 screens in because of being landscape. The section on top, we tried to look at what would be viewing angles optimum for an educational environment. And the wall on the right is an outside window wall, which is single pane insulated glass. It was fine for our TC cadets to drill, not so optimum in a room that was facing southwest in the fall here, where you get some very hot days. Next slide. This is a space that we also were able to get use of. It's a Nittany Line Inn on campus. It wasn't going to be used, obviously, during this pandemic for hotel use. The section to the lower right is all the rooms. These were actually repurposed and being used for single unit housing for students. But the ballroom there, as you can see, laid out with 130, I believe, was going to be used for a classroom. As we walked through here a couple times, we realized the students, although it looks fairly easy on this map, we're going to have a hard time getting there. It's a space they don't go to too often. So we created some signage and put them in places so they could find their way there the first week or two. They'd probably know after that. One of the things that's to point out here is that communication and coordination with what the students see on their schedules is very important. We called them boardroom and ballroom, which is what the Nittany Line Inn calls them. But on the schedule, they were labeled as 101 and 102. So we just hand wrote on there. I had the inn write that on there so students could find it. So again, that's a communication kind of thing that has to happen. Next slide. Lessons learned. This took a lot of time. We started this way back in April or May. We had to draw the 400 rooms here, plus or minus. There's another 500 at campuses. We drew a large percentage of those. We had a group of 4 different people helping draft these. There was a lot of teamwork required to get that done, both from Alex's team, from Pam managing all of the additional spaces, the communicating all the needs back and forth. You name it, there was a lot of teamwork. Flexibility, as decisions were made by administration. For instance, the furniture, we can't move it. You can't move 15,000 desks. You have to be flexible and be able to react to that. Communication is very important. We had 16 different committees across campus, instructor committees, physical plant committees, student committees, and it was important that a lot of us were on some of those and we could communicate within our unit very, very efficiently. Be prepared to explain your process. We drew these plans, and some people occasionally would question, was it the most efficient plan? So we would backtrack and look at our process and make sure that we felt we were creating the most efficient layouts, so that there was a confidence we were maximizing our space and capacity. That's all I've got. Alex, back to you.
Thank you, Tom. So after Tom and company tackled the layouts for the general purpose classrooms and departmental classrooms and labs, the next task was to come up with reduced capacities for all the other spaces. So that's where we leaned on our facilities information system, which we call LionSpaceFIS. It is the Cartegraph facilities information system product. And so in order to do that, Cartegraph, we implemented this system, first of all, just a couple years ago. We went from a homespun facilities information system, and like many enterprise level systems at Penn State, we opted to go to a software as a service, out of the box type of model. And then we implemented this for all campuses and made it available to all Penn State users. So we have a basic level of access where anyone with Penn State credentials can log into this system and see block plans, building layouts, accessibility maps, and that's leveraged throughout the Commonwealth. And then we have the next level up where we have these active users that edit space information. And so that goes back to the facility coordinator network that I spoke to earlier, where people are editing their space information, and that's what we're keeping in our facilities information system to track what we're doing. And so Cartegraph, like many software companies, this spring scrambled and did a great job of coming up with some interesting applications that we could use to help in our planning efforts. So the main one that we leveraged was called the COVID-19 planning application. And the gist of this is that this application allowed us to apply a particular square foot per person to types of rooms. Now, we started with 30 square feet per person just to get 3 feet on either side, and we worked our way up from there to take furniture and fixtures and other things in rooms and account and come up with a really safe number that we could potentially walk back from if we needed to, where we could give people a place to start for their planning purposes. And we applied this to all types of rooms where people may work or gather throughout all of our 90,000 spaces. And so this big list that you see on the screen here, this represents about 9,000 rooms. And as you can see, we're talking about labs, offices, lounges, athletic spaces, conference rooms, performance spaces, dining rooms. So all of these types of rooms where the people who run these spaces need to know how many people they can put in them as opposed to how many they used to be able to. So the way we set this up was with two different applications. One application was a consumption version, where the facility coordinator network and additional people that we granted access could log in and find out their reduced capacity numbers. And then one for our unit where we could actually update departmentally chosen actual COVID capacities. So at Penn State, we work on a spaces loaned kind of model where space is assigned to units, and those units are the stewards of the space. And so, of course, it is up to them to establish and enforce the reduced capacities for the spaces that they steward. The rollout of this, typical for our unit, we put out multiple communications. We host a training webinar with all the players involved and teach them how to do this. We produce a training video, and then we offer daily support. Thankfully, with this application, there was not a lot of daily support. Once we did the webinar, once we got folks going, it was very easy to use and people really ran with it. So this is a snapshot of what it looks like within the platform. On the left-hand side here, you can see the Hub Robeson Center. This is our student union at University Park, a very large building. The person assignable capacity that you see on the left there, those are people that are assigned to offices. So that's why that number is very low for a plus 250,000 square foot building. But the COVID-19 suggested capacity of just shy of 2,500 people. So when the hub came to us and said, how many people can we have in our building right now? This application allowed us to come up with a quick, safe number for them to start with. If you look at the picture on the right, you'll see the room that's highlighted on their first floor is room 129. That's Alumni Hall. That is a very popular, heavily used event room in the hub, and it typically holds 1,000 people when it's empty, and their COVID suggested capacity was 119. So very similar to what Tom showed before, quite a drastic reduction in capacity. So the other option that these folks had was to actually download a whole list of all their spaces. So we had a lot of facility coordinator personnel that would pull down a list of the spaces that they needed and then actually go out and start applying those capacities to their spaces. As I mentioned before, we also offered them the ability to measure their own spaces and come back to us. Or as Tom mentioned, you know, if they looked at our drawings and wanted to rework them a bit. This screen shows you two examples of labs, where the one on the top right is a very big lab, but they came back and said, you know, we're more comfortable with 78 instead of 105. And the one on the left is a student project room where they reduced it all the way down to 3. They only wanted 3 people working in that room at one time. So once we had all of these updated within the platform, the next thing we did, and by we, I mean Jason, because he did this all himself, I got to give him the credit, is load all of the layouts into the system and make them visible within all of the applications, and specifically the campus viewer application, where anyone with Penn State credentials could get in, click on a room, and see the new layout of the room. So this is very helpful to, you know, incoming professors, people looking to hold meetings, student organizations, janitorial staff, anyone who needs to be able to access that room and see what the new layout for that room is. There were also several other additional functionality options produced by Cartegraph. Occupant placement. So on the top right, you can see my office and Jason's office with our 60 square foot circles around us. You can see our conference room where we placed fictitious people in there to see what that would look like. On the bottom right, you can see circulation flow applied to a building. Penn State chose not to get in the circulation flow business, but we did offer this for people who wanted to be able to do this. You can also apply partitions and sanitizer stations. So I'm sure many of you on this call have become more familiar with sanitizer stations than you ever wanted to. And this platform offered a way for people to map those out. So what did we learn in regards to the use of our facilities information system and the COVID planning applications? The first thing is, you know, everyone was just as busy as we were, which was not a surprise. But really, you know, all of those additional cool features, I don't know how much we really leveraged those, but the COVID-19 planning application numbers were perfect for people to be able to consume and get that place to start and go and run with it and work on their planning process. As Tom mentioned, you know, these projects take a lot of time, and, you know, we had to just assign the resources and allow the people to do the work to get it done and get it done well and get it done before the semester started. And then also the last one, you know, this was something we certainly knew before, but if you want buy-in from people to the process, you got to give them some ownership. And I think somewhere that we really did well was by allowing the units to come back with their own capacity numbers and have that ownership, because, you know, we're not the ones out there living in those spaces and enforcing those capacities. So that's LionSpaceFIS. I'm going to turn it over to Jason, because the next thing we had to do was schedule classes and events.
Thanks, Alex. Let's go ahead and flip to the next slide. I think it's important to note that our baseline semester of fall 19, we scheduled 5,200 plus classes, as well as just shy of 6,000 student award events in our scheduling system. So Tom talked earlier a lot about how we got the numbers we got. All these activities are occurring at the same time. You know, the initial calculated percentages were applied to the scheduling softwares, and the registrars started building out schedules based on calculated, and we needed to move forward with drawn capacities. But how do we do this, and how do we share this information with each other? We're going to talk a little bit about that. Once the registrar had started building schedules, they had a request for 400 plus classes to be placed with their help. And the registrar was able to place all but 60 of those classes. So we talked earlier, we knew we needed more space. Just how much more space we needed, we started looking at different departmental spaces, which Tom touched on earlier. Next slide, please, Alex. So one of the tools offered with our scheduling software is X25 modeling. So we took a look at that fall 2019 schedule after Tom figured out what the weighted averages were for reductions. On the bottom right, you'll see that the world was green and everything was happy. We applied that reduction in the graph above, and our world went from green to yellow and red, yellow indicating that the classes weren't placed, or red indicating that they were impossible to place. Next slide, please. You saw this earlier. We expanded this spreadsheet as a tool to keep Tom and his crew up to date on what's been drawn, and as well as keeping the registrar up to date what's going on, because we were noticing a little bit of net gains and losses from calculated capacities to drawn capacities. So this spreadsheet was shared with the different teams, gave them real-time visibility of what was drawn and where we had gains and losses. Next slide, please. Tom touched on it earlier. We were working with departments and trying to find space where we could place classes. So we're going to go through a couple of those quickly, a couple quick wins and a difficult win. This first slide is the Bryce Jordan Center. It's a concert and sports venue. Pre-COVID, the capacity was 15,000 people. When we were done with a social distance classroom, the capacity was 235 students. Next slide, please. Some quick wins that we found were conference spaces. Shown here is the Hintz Alumni Center. On the right is its conference space setup, and on the left is its socially distanced classroom layout. Next slide. Tom showed some pictures earlier of the Nittany Lion Inn. Here's the boardroom. The technologies in these spaces made them quick wins. We could adapt to in-person learning quicker with some of the technologies that were already available. Next slide, please. You saw Tom's layout earlier of the ROTC drill deck. Here are some pictures of the drill deck as it's coming to life. You'll notice there was a need for screens to be installed. On the next slide, you heard Tom talk earlier about the lack of cooling in that space. So with limited time and budgets, we were able to provide some cooling. Also, the glass wall Tom was talking about earlier. The picture on the right will show you some canvas painters cloths that were hung to reduce some of the light coming in. Also, a shout out to our reno crew who came up with a creative projector mount to be able to facilitate hanging of projectors. On the next slide, you see the ET thing there in the front of the room. That was our first pass, and then the reno design on the previous slide enhanced the technology available in that space. Next slide, please. So coming out of the committees on return to campus was concerns about students' ability to be either on classes or on campus to attend classes, followed up with an online class, or the fact that students may have or could be confined to their dorms all day. The remote learning room concept came to be. So in order to alleviate those concerns of either being stuck in their classroom all day, or sorry, stuck in their dorm room all day, or not being able to return to a dorm room or have a place readily available for them, we donated a bank of rooms that were either underutilized or not used because their reduced capacities were so small. We also put out a call for help to departments and colleges who at the same time were identifying these spaces, and we're trying to find a way to make them available to everybody and communicate to the students that these spaces were available to them and some of those concerns could be alleviated. So on the next slide, you'll see the Penn State Go app and map were created to let students know that there are buildings on campus with remote learning rooms. Those are indicated with the red headphones above each building. And then on the next slide, when a student were to click on the building, they could quickly identify which rooms in the building had remote learning space available to them and the capacity of those spaces. On the next slide, we had a need, while we're still tiptoeing into event scheduling, we had to adjust our scheduling system to accommodate social distance capacities for these rooms. So we set the default to these rooms to social distancing, which reduced the capacity in these spaces, which then generated an error to the end user that, hey, your capacity, your head count is larger than the suggested capacity for this room. So that's how we adapted to the need to reduce event scheduled spaces. Next slide, please. One of the things that didn't go so well for us was tents. We were more reactive than we were proactive when it came to tents. Tents were a little more complex than we realized. We're still developing workflow for these things, but departments and colleges felt the need to have outdoor spaces. So we're still working through the growing pains of how do we quickly deploy an outdoor classroom or meeting space. Next slide. So a couple of quick perceived successes. We're getting students buy-in. On the right, on the second day of class, one of our student-run publications published a remote learning room etiquette guide, which kind of was an advocation that, hey, this university has acknowledged our concerns here, provided these spaces, and this particular student shared their experience and what proper etiquette was for these spaces. The upper right shows a metric from the Penn State Go app. Remote learning rooms were 1 and 2 in category searched, most accessed locations, and most popular categories. So I feel like we were successful in getting the word out to the students that we had these spaces available to you guys, and here's how you find them. Next slide. So we learned that not all spaces are created equal. We had limited time and limited budgets. Some spaces being offered had some downfalls that we couldn't overcome, either circulation or technology upgrades. So while there were spaces out there provided to us, they just weren't going to be able to be used in the time and budgets allotted. As we were seeking more spaces, some departments were rightfully protective of their spaces in a pandemic we were going through. A success we had was engaging early with the Penn State Go app people. That team was communicated with early, can we do this? And then we kept moving forward with our progress, identifying spaces and providing them the data needed to make the Go app come to life. I spoke about it a second ago. Tents were hard because they were multifaceted and there were things that we didn't consider early on that we probably should have. And getting the word out to the students early seems to have been a good thing as they advocated the use of remote learning rooms for us. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Mike Weaver to talk about operational implementation.
Thank you, Jason. My task in this was to implement temporary signage and seating layouts into the classrooms, and then to coordinate the install of social distancing stay-well tape and dots. Next slide, please. Just a quick overview of our classrooms. We have 386 general purpose classrooms contained into 63 buildings at University Park. plus the 9 non-traditional or alternate classrooms that we converted over to general purpose classrooms. The challenge, next slide, was to have all 386 general purpose classroom seat layouts drawn with the social distancing plus the 9 non-traditional. Once all the layouts were drawn, the actual capacities needed to be entered onto the signage. Then both the sign and the layout needed to be printed, which took a couple days to do that, as you can see the pile there. Next portion was to organize all the signs with the layouts per room and building. This also took some time. Then we had 3 to 4 of us grab a pack of the signs for each building and head out on campus with bikes, installing into each room. Took approximately 4 days to install, and Jason as well did most of this himself. Next slide. The next challenge was calculating all the tape and dots we needed for each room. We needed to order 20,000 feet of tape and 5,000 dots for all seats. Work orders were then submitted for second shift janitorial to install tape and dots into each room. Tape was used to mark off seats that you cannot sit in, and the dots were for seats that you could sit in. Next slide. Second shift supervisor was the lead on this install. He was given 30 employees, 10 employees per shift to install all the tape and dots, and to also move the chairs to other parts of the room. As you can see in the picture there, they had to push into the corner. Classes were to start August 24th. Branded materials did not arrive in a timely manner. Installation did not start until August 7th. After 2 nights of the installs, 10% of the rooms were completed. After a week, 52% of the rooms were completed. And with 2 days before the classes to start, all installation was completed. Next slide. The lessons learned. With using that many employees to install, everybody has their own ways of installing these things, and should have been more on site with them and did an actual one in person, because the way that they actually ended up doing it, we ended up running out of material midstream. So we had to order more, which took some time. The printing company, I don't think was prepared for the amount of quantities that we had to order. Plus all the departmental and colleges were ordering their materials as well. Should have probably played it safe and ordered probably more at the beginning for the materials. One positive note was on the communication that I had with the second shift supervisor on the install. He would call me daily and give me updates on where they were at and what problems and concerns that they had. So all in all, it worked out very well. And that is all I have, Alex.
Thanks, Mike and Tom and Jason. I'm sure you guys could hear it from us, but over the last 5 months, we've put in a lot of work. We've become a stronger team. We've learned a lot, and we continue to learn every day as we work our way through this incredible situation. We are happy to talk about this, and I know we're going to answer some questions if they've been placed in the chat. But if anyone has any specific questions for us, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd love to work together and talk about maybe what you have learned. Maybe you can tell us some tricks that we can use. So again, thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Billy.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's been quite informative. We do have questions. Our first question is, are there measures in place to ensure movable desks remain in place to keep the 6-foot distance or 6-foot clearance? How are you addressing students not getting too close to one another when getting and leaving their seats?
I think I can probably answer that. This is Mike. So the custodial personnel, when they go into the rooms each night to do their sanitizing, they are to have all the seats set up in the layout that we have provided. And as far as the students using the proper seats, we have left that up to the instructors to sort of police. I'm not sure they're happy with that, but at this point, that's where we are at with that. I don't know if anybody else has anything to add with that.
I can add to it, Mike, because I think some instructors were actually assigning seats. They were numbering them on their own on those plans and assigning a specific seat. So they were trying to control that. Regarding circulation, I believe the guidelines are for no more than 10 minutes of contact. So Penn State decided not to be as stringent about having circulation defined indoor, outdoor. There was a video produced that asked that incoming students to a room wait till all the students inside, leave the room before the other ones come in. And that was a video that went out by the technology people to show instructors how they'd like to see the rooms used.
Thank you. Our next question is, how often are you cleaning all of these rooms?
Each general purpose classroom is cleaned once per day with the sanitation. And they're actually going through and cleaning up all the desks and the podium and doing a full cleaning of each room each night.
And then we do have enhanced cleaning protocols in the music building for our spaces where there's higher aerosol production. They have like a level 2, if you will, a cleaning protocol, and then also a timing between when people can be in a room after a group has left the room.
Thank you. Our next question, I believe you've already answered this one, but we'll just ask it again. Who moved and marked all of the furniture in each classroom space?
Yeah, that was, there was a group of second shift custodial that was set up to, that was their main goal starting on August 7th to get all the chairs set up in the way that we had them moved, get all the tape installed and get all the dots installed. And it took them about 3 weeks to get that completed for 386 rooms plus the 9 non-traditional.
Thank you. Our next question. Has the need to find more space on campus due to social distancing yielded a finding that there is actually more suitable space on campus than previously assumed? Meaning that it's changed your thinking of how much new space you need to build once we no longer have the social distancing?
That's an interesting question. The spaces that we use, the alternative or non-traditional, are not general purpose classrooms. They actually belong to those other units. And to take those, would they be good classrooms? Yes, some of them very much. Alumni Hall doesn't want to give up their conference rooms. The Bryce Jordan Center doesn't want to give up their main gymnasium. ROTC deck, again, that belongs to those people. So there's certainly space that could be used for classrooms. I don't think it's that easy to necessarily put it into the classroom fold.
I think maybe a bigger impact has been seen on the ability to work effectively remotely, and starting to ask questions about how much space do we need for staff as opposed to the space that we need, like Tom was talking about for our classrooms and events and things like that are typically very heavily used.
Okay, thank you. Next one is, person just wanted to say thank you, great presentation. Can you speak to the particular issues you ran into related to requests for tents?
Well, go ahead, Alex.
So it kind of came from all over. First, the tents, you get ready for the pun here, literally popped up. And the need for tents and the process involves so many different facets. The picture that Jason showed had all the markings on the ground from when you're going to stake tents. And so, that's one individual space. But the bigger concern, from an overall perspective is, okay, are we going to have 5 tents, or are we going to have a campus that looks like a circus? And so, we kind of had to really go out and find all of the requests. And the problem there was we didn't have a good place to filter all those requests and drive them to that we knew that everyone was on board with. And so once we got our arms around that part and figured out the requests, then we could look at them as a whole and say, okay, let's talk about what we can handle and what makes sense from a larger perspective. Jason, I don't know if I covered what you were going to hit there.
Yeah, I think the larger issue there was we kind of overlooked that, given that typical fall semester for us is a couple of weeks of decent weather, and then we quickly shift to our dreary, cloudy, cooler environment here. And I just don't think we put enough forethought into, hey, this is a need that could be fulfilled, and how are we going to fulfill it?
I will add, there were other staff members in our Planning, Design, and Properties PDP unit that were looking at things when the units requested, hey, can we put a tent up for our students' use in our department? I recall one was in a fire lane, so that was rejected. So our planners were looking at places where people wanted to put these. And I believe the certain size of tent also requires a building inspection approval. So there were some other things that certainly needed to be coordinated.
Thank you. The next one is curious about HVAC systems. Did you increase amount of fresh air intake?
It wasn't directly under our unit, but that I know was a highly discussed item, and a whole other section of physical plant went into buildings and looked at what the air exchanges were and improved those wherever they could. Windows that were operable were also discussed to be left open if possible, and I know people were also doing that.
Thank you. Next question, did you link the GIS enterprise and scheduling as well as register system?
So we do have some links between the two of them. They are not fully linked, if you will. So from the GIS application, you cannot see the schedule of every room, but we do have some leverage of the API where you can see features of rooms that are pulled from the scheduling system into the facilities information system. We also, have a couple other integrations like that in various systems, and then of course have lots of pipe dreams of where we could go with that.
Okay, thank you. How is your team handling vandalism and theft of COVID signage dots tape?
It's a good question. We're all working remotely. I live probably the closest to the office and get on site to look at various things. And as I've walked back through classrooms, I see certain things are missing. I think one room actually got missed, 2 or 3 on a fixed counter. I haven't seen a lot of theft or removal. The tape may not hold up for another semester for spring, but that'll be an interesting thing to see if we lose these and we'll have to replace them.
Okay, thank you. Next question, any COVID transmission traced to classroom attendance?
Alex, I don't know if you have anything. I don't know that I have a good answer to that. We do have a tracing system, but I don't know that we've seen a report back yet to know whether it's actually come from a classroom.
Yeah, I have not either.
Because you could have someone in, that could be a roommate, could be in the same class as you. Did they get it in their dorm room or did they get it in the class? I'm not sure. That's a very good question. I would like to know the answer myself, where they can track it back to a space.
Thank you. Next question. What is the procedure for cordoning off areas in case of an identified COVID outbreak?
Alex, we should have had somebody from EH&S here for that type of question. I know there's procedures, Alex, and I'm sure if you know what they are to be able to get this information out in scheduling. But I don't.
I know that our office assists with those situations sometimes in order to tell them what's going on in spaces, but I don't know the exact procedure. Would be happy to find out and connect the person asking the question with the EH&S team, like Tom mentioned.
Okay, thank you. Just a reminder to our attendees as well, if we don't get through all the questions, a report will be sent to our presenters with all the questions asked today, and they will get back to the person asking the question with an answer. So we'll continue on with some more questions here. Any strategies to control capacities in non-public buildings, such as student center, library, museum spaces?
In my walk around in those types of spaces, those units have, in some cases, removed seating and spaced them appropriately. In other cases, they've actually covered all of the seats and pushed them to one location and put them off limits. So it's really been a combination of how the hub, for instance, which is student affairs and has dining, they've removed some seating and separated things. The students remain separated.
Okay, thank you. Did you use 6 foot on center for your spacing for standard classroom? What spacing did you use for singing? And the third question, what size did you use for your guidelines?
Yeah, those circles are 6 foot diameter, so it would be 6 foot center to center. Did you say sitting or singing?
Singing.
Singing. Yeah, that was a whole separate problem. We have 3 or 4 classrooms in the music building. They were taken offline as general purpose, and the music department utilized those independently of us. I don't have a real good answer of what they've done, because obviously singing can expel a lot more droplets than just speaking.
Okay, thank you. Next question, did you consider disinfectant pop-up wipes for classrooms since sanitizing is provided just once per day?
Yes, so custodial has inserted a so-called bucket of towelettes into each general purpose classroom at the front of the podium. And they have phone numbers on if they are empty that the instructor is to call, and they will bring another bucket over to them immediately.
Next question, did you place any plexiglass barriers at the instructor area zone, or did you just simply provide 6 foot of distance?
Just provided a space, no barriers.
Next question, did you change HVAC filtration? If so, what changes did you make?
Again, that's a question we'll have to follow up on. I know that our engineering department looked at that pretty stringently. I think they were looking at MERV filters wherever they could do that. So yeah, I would say that's a follow-up question. We could get some information.
Okay, thank you. Have you had any enforcement issues?
I've not personally heard of anything. Alex, Jason, Mike, I don't know if you have either.
Yeah, I have not either at this point.
Yeah.
Just some that the rooms that, you know, some tape is ripped off and we have to go back and the custodial has to, you know, retape or just fix it. But other than that, I haven't heard anything.
And instructors can usually be pretty vocal if they need help enforcing things like that. So I don't think there's been any major problems.
I think
Okay,
we've been.
next question. Oh no, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to give a nod to our students because I think overall we've been very impressed with how seriously our students have taken these guidelines. I can't speak to what they're doing when they're not attending class or on campus, but what we've seen on campus we're very impressed with, and they seem to be advocates and really helpful in this process, as opposed to pushing against it and making it more difficult.
I'd add to that because I actually have a third year on campus, and I think students are doing a great job of advocating proper process, especially the upperclassmen that had the world yanked out from under them in the spring. They were excited to return in the fall, and they're just trying to police themselves to ensure that they don't have that carpet yanked out from under them again.
We have time for one more question. Were there any adjustments that had to be made with cleaning, sanitizing operations than you had planned for?
Mike, do you have anything you do with janitorial the most?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I don't have anything off the top of my head that there was issues. I just know we had one portion with the stay well tape that we had applied that somebody had removed them on a bunch of seats and then just threw them in the trash can. So we had to redo those, but I don't know of any. I'd have to contact our custodial people to find out if there's any additional rooms or issues that they needed to look at separately.
And Mike, I think that actually happened before classes actually started, right?
Yes, it did.
Okay. Well, I want to let our panelists know that you got a tip of the hat from Beth Clark. She said, "Great job, Penn Staters." So I just wanted to let you know that she's been on and listening today. We have time for just one more quick question. How do you handle the unused classrooms that don't meet social distancing requirements?
So a lot of those rooms were part of the remote learning room program that Jason spoke to. Once all of the classes were scheduled, there were quite a few rooms that maybe started out as 20 and ended up as 6. And that made up a big bank of rooms that we were able to designate specifically for remote learning rooms. Tom and crew went ahead and did layouts for them. They are set up just like a classroom. They're cleaned every night, just like a classroom. But when you get to them, you see that remote learning room signage, and they're on the map that Jason showed, and they're being used for students to attend the online portion of their classes, since the vast majority of our courses have at least an online component, and then partially in class. So those rooms have been very helpful to us.
Well, thank you. And just a reminder that copies of today's presentation will be sent out to all the attendees today. I'll be sending an email probably later this afternoon or early evening to everyone who attended today. And I would especially like to thank Cartegraph for sponsoring this webinar today. Without their help, we would not have known about this great program. So until next time, I'd like to say thank you, be safe, stay healthy, enjoy your day. Goodbye now.